How's it going?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me once again for another tremendous episode of Trad Queen Story Hour. I'm joined this evening by the inestimable Will Chamberlain, who is the senior counsel, I almost got that wrong, for the IAP project, as well as for,
Article 3 project.
Article 3 project. Thank you, sir. Let me try that again. Senior counsel at the IAP and at the Article 3 project. Will, how have you been doing since I last saw you?
Doing great. Kids, little girl's doing very good. She's almost 16-month-old and enjoying time here in Arlington.
Awesome. So I remember when she was born. That seems like really, really recently. Time flies. Apparently, I must be getting old, but I'm very happy to hear that. She's adorable. What have you been up to lately, Will?
Not too much. Let's see. I'm getting involved in a representation of a January 6th defendant. We'll see how that goes. Although this is someone who's already been convicted and is just awaiting sentencing. So it's a bit like that's where the stakes are on that.
Interesting.
But also just doing my normal thing, advocating on tech and some judicial issues.
Very cool. Does it feel kind of lonely being in that part of the country and holding your kind of not insane views?
Oh yeah. No, it's I mean, there's a good number of conservative journalists that are sort of in our social circles, so that helps a decent amount. But yeah, no, of course we're surrounded by liberals here, and them's the breaks.
Well, yeah, so it goes, I guess. And it's very important to stay strong in these blue areas. I know people are like, flee, you have to get out of these big cities. And it's like, you want to let go of them entirely? I feel like that might not be the best approach.
I mean, this is not a place we're going to stay long term, and certainly where we wouldn't want to stay to raise a family. So we're not. Our lease is up in July. We'll see how much longer we actually stay. Nice. So nice. I don't want to get fully on board with oh man, we can't leave the blue areas. Like we would like
thinking about it. Yeah,
if it makes sense.
Gotcha. That does make sense. Yeah, I'm so torn because I'm like, I think there's going to be a great sort happening. People talk a lot about like a civil war, and I'm like, I don't think we want a civil war. We don't want violence. We don't want people hurting each other. For a while there, everyone was super gung-ho about it. They're like, bring it on. We have what it takes. And I'm like, I don't think you want that. What you probably really would rather have is a great natural sort where people who agree with other people like them end up near those people, and then people who disagree with them.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to go to war with the federal government. I think people underestimate just how strong the federal government is relative to where it was in 1865. And let's remember that the federal government won in 1865 after killing something like 5% of the population of the country and setting the South to ruin. So no, Civil War is bad. I think that's certainly, I think, my least controversial take. We don't want a civil war. And I think if you're upset, I mean, you just need to go to an area with like-minded people and kind of fight to limit the extent the federal government has control over your life. And I mean, really, at the end of the day, Florida's pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome despite having a bad federal government. Like, the GOP there does a really good job of making that a very livable state.
For sure. Which I really, truly appreciate. Oh, my mic is going crazy. Pardon me. It has a mind of its own. I think it has a ghost. What do you think? I tweeted about this earlier today, and it's very troubling to me. So the Biden DOJ has decided to file a suit against Tennessee over their transgender affirming surgery law, saying that should not ever be allowed in their state. What do you think about that? Does that trouble you?
It's not surprising, given, I think, the Bostock ruling of the Supreme Court and where the Biden DOJ is, and believing this, they think that this butchery is in fact medical care, which I think is like the first major divide between our side and theirs. Like, we see this is butchery. This has no real medical purpose. There's no evidence it actually improves outcomes for the people who get it. The evidence suggests that, on the contrary, they are they're more likely, if anything, to commit suicide and things like that after they get the surgery that is supposedly supposed to solve their mental health problems. So, I mean, there's just this massive difference of opinion. But given the way that the left understands this issue, right, the left understands this as this is necessary medical care for an oppressed minority, and Tennessee is trying to fight that. Well, it's not surprising that they're trying to use civil rights law to overturn what Tennessee is doing.
Interesting. So what is Bostock? You want to break that down for us real fast?
Oh, Bostock, I'm not super familiar with the case, but I know the basic outlines. It extended the Civil Rights Acts of 1964, and I think it was the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and equal protection, it extended that to gender identity in particular. So it said that because basically their argument is that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 explicitly prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex. And the idea is that gender is inextricably intertwined with sex, and therefore gender discrimination is also prohibited, meaning discrimination against trans people is prohibited. That's the basic logic of that holding. I don't think that's right. I think that gender and sex are fundamentally distinct. I think that's actually one of the basic premises of much of the left's I guess the early modern gender theory. Talk about like Judith Butler and various things where they talk about the distinction between biological sex and gender. And so I think that ruling was wrong, but that's the ruling that was made. And given that that's the ruling that was made, it's not surprising that the Civil Rights Department is going after Tennessee.
They're really just following in the outline that this laid out for them, which really not surprising. But at the same time, do you think this is going to amp up? Do you think this is going to get worse as we go forward? Like, I feel like we're losing our states' rights.
Oh, yeah. I think at some point there probably will be a resolution at the federal level about whether anybody's allowed to either prohibit these surgeries or do them. And so control of the federal government still matters in the sense of, if we get people who are like-minded in the DOJ and also on the courts, then they will see things our way and maybe get to the point where we have, I think, because I believe that the way this care should be looked at, I think Michael Knoll said something a few months back about transgenderism should be eradicated from the public square. And he got huge backlash for that. People are like, you want genocide? It's like, no. I mean, he eradicate is an aggressive word, but I like what he's saying really is that basically we want in the public square to go back to the world where everybody sees gender dysphoria as a mental illness, and that the cure for mental illness is not physical alteration of bodies to accord with mental illness, right? We don't, like body dysmorphia doesn't, we don't cut off healthy people's limbs because to make them feel more, at home in their own body.
Right.
So basically the way to look at it is this is a mental illness. These quote unquote gender affirming treatments are butchery, medical malpractice. The doctors that do them at a minimum should risk being sued into oblivion because what they're doing is not medically sound. And if failing that, perhaps even criminal charges, but most certainly, like, that's the way this needs to be looked at. It's not saying, this is not trans genocide, quote unquote. This is like, no. This is a mental illness. We understand that some people have it and have to live with it, etc. But these butchery treatments, like, they're not medically sound, and no one thinks they are. Everybody thinks they're absurd in the same way that you would, like, again, cutting off somebody's like arm because they think they shouldn't have an arm. You'd say that's medically absurd. We're not going to do that.
Exactly. Well, you could probably really make an easy comparison to lobotomies, which were touted as like this wonderful cure for everything from migraines to depression to anxiety, literally everything. They're like, oh, all you have to do is take an ice pick and just, whatever. And obviously that was a horrible idea. And what I noticed from that I think we can translate over to the trans conversation was that they were attempting to treat things that were mental with physical solutions. And when you look at our current medical care, like outlines, there's nothing else that we do that for. So if we were to return to the idea that gender dysphoria is mental and needs to be handled mentally, then we could actually have a much more productive, much more compassionate conversation. We just saw this story about an 18-year-old who died because of a heinously botched surgery and puberty blockers. Like, the combination of those two things was just actually literally lethal for this person. And that is just so sad, and it should not be happening. But
I mean, whether or not that's criminal, it certainly is negligent, right? Like, that's a lack of reasonable care on the part of doctors, going all the way back to the first one that prescribed puberty blockers. It's a lack of reasonable care on their part. They should all be able to be liable for malpractice, and the family should be able to, sue them and get paid into, and that would stop all this nonsense real quick, right?
Yeah.
Like, doctors realizing that their malpractice rates, if they did this type of surgery, would just skyrocket, would just stop. And, we'd solve a lot of problems.
Yeah, I think you're entirely correct. I think that's what's going to happen. I think Chloe Cole is going after the doctors that were affiliated with, I think, Kaiser Permanente. There's a lady in Canada who's doing the same thing up there. On that front, it looks pretty bright. But when you look at the DOJ pushing this kind of stuff through, that's troubling to me. And it feels like the federal government is intent on putting, currently at this point, and it's in this iteration of the left-leaning federal government, it feels like they're intent on putting a king into power to make sure that they push all of their ideas through, regardless of the actual, checks and balances that we have.
And we know the end goal. They want what Canada has, which is laws that say that parents must affirm their child's gender expression.
Right.
Regardless of underlying biological sex. And if they don't, it's child abuse. That's the world they want, right? Yes. They want, doesn't matter if both parents, right now you're actually in a situation in the United States where you really want to make sure you marry someone who agrees with you, because if you marry someone who disagrees and you have a divorce, they can manage the child's care and put them on the transition carousel. But right now, if you both agree, then, the state's not going to get in the way of parental decision-making.
Right.
If the parents are on a unified front. But that's not true in Canada. Right. That's not, and that could not be true in a lot of other places where it's like they view the child. If a child decides they're the other gender, you as the parents just lose all your rights to say, no, this is gender dysphoria. We want to see this treated, as opposed to you getting all these bizarre surgeries and hormone treatments that are going to ruin your life.
Right, for sure. Well, we can see Washington and California already kind of putting the runaway child, like this. There's this little way they can get around actual reasonable law by saying if your kid runs away and they're trying to transition to a different gender, then if they come to our state, we don't have to tell you about it, and we can help them get gender transition treatments and surgeries if that's what they want.
And we're going to need, if we actually want to win this, we will need to win back power and enact federal law that essentially supersedes, what they're doing. Hold on one second.
You're good.
All right. Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. You're right that we need to win back power, though, at the federal level. How do we do that, Will? What do you think our path is there? Who's going to win?
We'll get more into this. We need to win the presidency back in 2024.
Sure.
That seems very straightforward. I'm becoming more and more convinced that, the real simple answer is it really comes down to whether we nominate Trump again or DeSantis. And the reason I think that is because I don't think Trump can win. Not a primary, but I don't think he can win a general election. He lost the last one. In the interim between the time he lost the last one and now, he's done a bunch of stuff that has alienated a slew more moderates and independents. There's no room for growth. The polls, all the polls that suggest this, right, that independents loathe him, that they don't like Biden, but they hate Trump more. And I don't think he's going to win. And if we lose power again in 2024, that's 4 more years of left-wing radical judges. That could potentially mean losing the House back to the Democrats, because you got to remember, the House, we have a very tiny majority in the House. If we were to lose a presidential election, we'd likely simultaneously lose the House too. And we wouldn't have control of DOJ. We wouldn't have control of anything. So, all these, it's weird to say that so much rides on a primary election, but in my view, the numbers bear it out. If we don't take power back, although we can complain all we want about trans issues, we'll just lose because we'll lose control of the federal government. Right. So we got to win. We can't lose. We have to win.
Right. And that I'm really very much on the same page with you here. I am very concerned for the next 4 years. And I don't, heaven help us if we lose to Joe Biden. I gave him an expletive of a middle name at the end of one of my previous shows because I cannot imagine a world in which we lose to Joe Biden again.
Right. It's terrible. And, people call me a never Trumper. I'm starting to get some of that, which is super weird because I was a Trump supporter and voted for him twice in 2016 and 2020. And I'll even say now, Trump wins the primary, I'll vote for him in the general. And I think Trump, if Trump were sitting in office in February 2025, that's a good outcome. It's not the best outcome in my view. I think DeSantis would be better, but it's a good outcome. right? It means Republicans have control of the government. It means
Right.
there's a Republican presidential administration. And it also means it's not a neoconservative presidential administration because Trump
True,
doesn't like
too.
the neocons.
Yep.
So like that's not a bad outcome. If that's a 80 percentile outcome, it's 85 percentile outcome. Like I'd be perfect. I'm not going to sit here and let the perfect be the enemy of the good. The reason I say that it's so important to support DeSantis, why I think it's such a central thing, is because I don't think Trump can win in general. I think recent history suggests that, you know, you look at, for example, Stacey Abrams in Georgia, right? Lost her gubernatorial election, pulled the same kind of stunt where she said, "Oh, it's all stolen from me," blah blah blah, never conceded defeat, ran it back 4 years later and got smashed by 7 or 8.
Yeah.
Beto O'Rourke, you know, he had a close Senate election against Ted Cruz in 2018 where he only lost by like 2, which is in Texas of all places, right? He's the new star. But he runs for president, he loses again, and then he tries to run against Abbott for governor, and he gets smashed by 10. Right? So, like when you nominate somebody who's already lost, and especially if they didn't accept the loss, and then hope that things just improve magically in 4 years, like odds are they won't. And odds are that like a lot of the sort of swing voters that went for Trump, you know, because there are plenty of those swing voters that went for Trump in 2020, but a lot of those swing voters won't go for him again in 2024, that they've had it with him, that they're tired of him. And I mean, I speak from just personal experience and anecdotes of like people I know who are not like partisan Republicans, but who voted Trump in 2020. They're like, I'm not voting for him again in 2024. Don't like him.
Right.
And, you know, I don't have that same attitude towards Trump where it's like, oh man, I really don't like the guy anymore. It's like, he is who he is.
Right.
But, like, I'm just conscientious of the fact that it's like, okay, well, if other people don't like him, then he's not going to win. And we need those, you know, we have other candidates that could win those voters. We should be looking at those other candidates.
Right. I agree. It's really interesting that you bring up these two people that tried again after they lost, who refused to admit that they had lost. I had not thought about that, but that's entirely correct. And something that we would probably benefit from bearing in mind, because that sounds like what's likely to happen again, especially when you look at the midterms. That did not go well for the people that Trump endorsed, which I think we should take as like a huge red flag when it comes to nominating him.
Right. The midterms were a test of this thesis that, you know, after 2 years of Biden, everybody would be like, oh, we made a huge mistake. And let's go back to the old way of doing things. And it's like, not really, no. I mean, it was like, you know, there were plenty of messages that Biden wasn't very well liked. We did win back the House. But in general, like Trumpy candidates underperformed, you know, and that's including people like, for example, like I really liked Blake Masters.
Me too. Yeah.
I really liked him a lot. I donated the max to his campaign. I really liked him. He lost by a lot. Like he lost by 4 in Arizona, which is a lot for a Republican to lose by in Arizona. And other candidates, you know, the only real victory we had from like the kind of populist side when it came to the Senate was Vance in Ohio. And I mean, Ohio is a really red state now.
Yeah.
So, you know, and then, I mean, conversely, like you look at, I mean, I think DeSantis is a populist too, but then you have DeSantis winning Florida by 20.
Yeah.
You know, in a world where we just didn't have great performances anywhere else. After remember, I don't know if you remember like election night, DeSantis wins Florida by 20 early in the evening. We think, oh man, this is going to be, we're going to crush it. And we just didn't, you know, like nothing, everything else went south. And you're just sitting there like, oh my God, okay. Yeah. That's a mixed message. But I mean, to me, the obvious answer is, I mean, you know, I feel like it's, you know, the bell curve meme where, you know, you have like over here, maybe we should nominate the guy who won by 20. And then it's like, no, actually Trump stole the election, blah, 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 blah. And then it's like the smart wizard.
Smart
like,
people,
hey, we should nominate the guy who won Florida by 20. That's a smart thing to do.
Yeah. Well, I was listening to Tucker last night, preparing for last night's live stream, and he was talking about how for the midterms he let himself get out over his skis in much the same way I did. Like I really resonated with that speech because I did the same thing. Like I went out there and I was like, I don't think John Fetterman's gonna win, you know, all this stuff XYZ, and everyone came back like, and they're like, you were wrong. And I'm like, yeah, sorry, the people Trump picked didn't win. I don't know what to tell you, and that says less about my poor judgment skills when it comes to picking winners and losers than it does for Trump's power to convince people to vote for someone.
Yeah, I mean, the Trump endorsement in general elections is a giant anchor. It's not, it doesn't help.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great for the primary, especially in like a contested primary with no incumbents.
Right.
Then that's like a big, you know, anchor for, you know, candidate to get like a solid base of support. But in the general, like, there's a lot of moderates and independents that can't stand the guy, that are not opposed to voting Republican, have voted Republican, but they cannot stand Trump. And that's just, it's like you can fight against that reality all you want, or you can just like accept it and be like, okay, this can't be the guy in 2024. Like, we really do need to make sure it's somebody else. We don't need to give up the entire political project. But there's another point that I think people need to consider when they're like, because I feel like so many people I know, and it's just like, we're all, the train is coming down the track and everybody's standing in the fucking railway. Pardon my language. And
You're fine.
nobody's getting out of the way. And like the damage is, we have this populist movement, right, that took control of the Republican Party in 2016 and has been kind of cementing its power over the party itself in the last 8 years since Trump was first elected. And that's great. We dislodged neoconservatives. Many of them fled to the Democratic Party. Great.
Good riddance.
Good riddance, right? Like, we have changed the way, people who want to run for office. The new people who come to office are much, much better than the former incumbents. Like, great. How did we do that? Well, we beat the old version, right? The old version demonstrated it couldn't win an election against Obama. It struggled. And then Trump came in and won a presidential election. So it's like we became into the ascendancy. And that's the way politics works. There's a natural momentum behind, within an inter-party squabble over ideology, the side that can get votes is going to have the advantage. The side that can win elections is going to have an advantage. If populists lose an election that badly, as I think we will if we nominate Trump again, right? That's the end of MAGA. It's the end of populism. It could be the return of all these people we hate. And so and yet another reason why I think it's so central to like focus on, is there a guy who represents our values who can win a general? Because we can't lose another general. We just can't. Two straight generals means, basically next time around, there's no way anybody even close to Trump will have a chance. I think.
Right. I think you're right. Well, I think that we need to step away from tribalism and start moving toward pragmatism, because the tribalism, I think, is really going to bite us. And I will say, with full disclosure, 100%, thank God Twitter is not real life. Like, I know that Trump has a lot of fans. I have not received as much hatred from the left as I have from Trump fans at this point, which is really blowing my mind. Like, yeah, we're on the same side, dude. I just don't like your guy as much as you do.
Yeah, right. Like, I mean, I'm getting, there's people like posting collages of former tweets of mine. The really funny thing is when I say stuff about DeSantis, they're like posting collages of tweets of mine from like March 2020 when I was very hawkish on COVID and like pro-mask and all that stuff.
Right.
And they're like, see, you were pro-mask in 2020 and super hawkish on COVID. I'm like, yeah, Ron DeSantis was way smarter than me. You should support him.
You should check out what he was up to.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, he disagreed with me and he was right. And now I think he was right. So you should vote for him. They're like, no, I want to vote for Trump. I'm like, well, he was with me.
Yeah, he was totally on your side.
He agreed with me. Yeah. He was doing all this shit. He was the guy who put Fauci up there. Like, I'm not the big, guy, there were like the Fire Fauci crowd. I was never in the Fire Fauci crowd.
Right.
Until it was obvious he was failing. But like, not in, when people were really serious about that was early in the pandemic. I was never in that crowd. I was a COVID hawk. You disagree with me on that, that's fine. I have a presidential candidate for you who is right in line with your views. He's the governor of Florida.
It's so interesting that DeSantis echoes so many of their views, but because they love Trump so much, it's very hard for them to see that. And it's the left spent the last 5+ years calling people who love Trump cultists. And I obviously thought they were completely wrong. I was like, this is just a guy who's telling us something different that we've never heard before. He's not acting like any other politician. And I personally think that's fantastic. But these people now are rejecting, I don't know, they're rejecting a really good candidate in favor of someone who has lost, and not only lost, but cost us serious election victories and cost us like actual wins, and who says things like take the guns first, due process second, and who says stuff, this is very near and dear to me, like pro-life is a losing issue for the GOP. These are things that I can't get behind. Like, we know that this guy used to be a really, really big Democrat, and I think that needs to be remembered even by his biggest fans. Like, if left to his own devices, he will likely revert to the things that got him through the first 60, 70 years of his life. Why wouldn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, I guess fandom is a good way to explain what we see, right? Like fandom in
Right.
anything. I mean, there are fans of, there are people who are really big fans of Trump. That's okay. I'm not even mad about that.
Right. Yeah.
I don't want to use like, I don't want to use pejoratives to describe people, right? Like even people who are in my mentions saying horrible things about me. It's like, okay, you're Trump fans. I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
Like you're fans of the man. Okay. Right. So if I say, I don't think much of the man, you're going to be angry at me. Okay.
That's
fair.
fine. Yeah.
Whatever. Right. Like you're not my intended audience. Right. Like I don't, I mean, or maybe you are in the sense of like, I hope to bring you around and get you to see that like, this is not the right way. This is not a good way for us as a party to be approaching politics, like in just fandom. This shit matters a lot more than that. And so, we as a party need to get power back. And so I get you like Trump personally a lot. I used to too. I don't like him as much anymore, but I'm still fine with him. But I guess, they're like, I guess that's how I roll with that. I'm not as angry at the people who support Trump, even the people in my mentions who are being obnoxious.
Right, for sure. Well, I certainly don't blame them either, and I was fully on board with them for much of Trump's presidency. I thought he was doing great things. I was really glad to see some of the stuff he was doing. It was unorthodox. He was calling people out who really needed it, and I respect that and fully appreciate that. But then I started to notice that he would give interviews to people he thought he could get to like him, and they would never go the way he planned. They would be twisted, beyond the pale. They would never be in context. They would never, cover him honestly. And I think he certainly deserved that, but he kept turning to people who would not give him that. And given his recent Truth Social posts, I don't think that has changed at all.
Yeah. One thing that I think people are undercounting is, I say like, look, Trump doesn't care about policy, right? Like, and he's, I don't like the term that he is the establishment because I don't think that's true, but he's created his own establishment and they behave very similarly to the way the old neocon establishment behaved, right? In terms of bullying people into endorsements, things like that. But the thing to understand about Trump is like the old establishment was there to enforce an orthodoxy about ideas and policy. So if you wanted to be a member of the old establishment, you had to support the Iraq War. You couldn't criticize neoconservatism, etc. That was very destructive because those ideologies were bad and wrong. Trump's establishment isn't enforcing the orthodoxy of policy, right? There's everybody, you could be Lindsey Graham is there, JD Vance is there. Like those two people don't agree on anything, but they're in the Trump camp. What does it require? Well, just requires being really nice to Donald Trump. Right, it requires just agreeing that Donald Trump is the man. That's the orthodoxy that the Trump establishment enforces.
Right.
And Donald Trump is the man; he should be the president. Like that's the only unifying thing. But like, I almost feel like that's not even an ethos, though. Like you guys don't. There's no. The only force of that is the force of Donald Trump's personality. I think it's inherently weaker than something like the old school neoconservative establishment. So I think, I think ultimately it will fall. I think people are really underestimating DeSantis' chances. And once he gets in the race and actually starts running, he's just a better candidate. He's smarter, more articulate, sharper, younger, more energy. Like you name it, he's got it.
I think probably his biggest win at that point would be once he does, if I'm assuming he's going to enter, and sooner rather than later, I hope. I think probably his biggest win will be not having the baggage that Trump has. I mean, Trump is a very forceful personality. He's done crazy things in his past. But I think I will say at the end of the day, Donald Trump is 100% the cleanest president we've ever had. The stuff they're going after him for, wild to me. He did nothing. Oh, yeah. Like what?
I mean, it's the Stormy Daniels stuff is silly. I think even like these state level prosecutors going after him, the classified document stuff, it's all nonsense. It's all weak nonsense. But the only thing we should see it as is an indicator of how much people hate the guy. Like, there's not some big grand conspiratorial scheme coming from the left. They just hate him and want to put him in jail. And more the point, like you look at the polling, there's some interesting polling out there that asks them, the general public 2 questions, which is like, do you think that these prosecutions are political? Most people say yes, something like 65%. Then the next question is, do you think it's a bad idea or are you opposed to these prosecutions? 65% say no.
Oh, wow.
So a solid 30% of the population, probably the middle, thinks 1, the prosecutions are nonsense, and 2, please do them because we're tired of this guy and we hate him.
It's so funny that you mentioned the word tired because exhaustion was the word that people associate with Trump most.
Yeah. They're tired of him. They're tired of his shtick.
It's hard.
Like,
It's hard to carry on with. It's hard to follow. It's hard to watch him be attacked relentlessly. And even though I'm not the man in the arena, it's still tough to try to be like, okay, well, I defend him. You're wrong about this. And incredibly difficult, and I don't
when the
blame
first primary votes, like, so when the next general comes around, the Trump shtick will have been going for over 9 years, right? He'll have been, when you think about it, right? Like, he'll have been dominating our politics and our political rhetoric and our political discourse is the better word. Have been dominating our political discourse for over 9 years. It's a really long time. Very few people manage to stay relevant and like interesting after all that. Most people lose their luster, right? Like, think about, somebody as simple as George W. Bush, obviously not the charisma of Trump, whatever,
Yeah,
but like
right.
much more liked early in his presidency. By within 7 years, everybody hated the guy. His approval rating was completely in the tank. Like,
Right.
there's a core fan base for Trump. I get that, but it's like, I feel like the people who are saying, "Oh, he's totally electable," it's like, you guys need to you need to go touch some grass and talk to normal people, because
Yeah.
you're not going to find those normal moderate independents who may well have voted for Trump in 16 or 20 willing to do it again.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. That's actually really good advice, because I find that I'm in a very, very blue part of the country, but people are still very civil. They're super nice. I had a lady return my wallet even after she knew my political views. She found my email by looking me up online. She knew
mhm.
exactly what I thought, and she still went out of her way to say, "Hey, you know what? I found your wallet. I'm sure you could probably use like your car keys and your
Right.
credit card and everything. So come get it. Here's my address. See you soon." It was so nice of her. And I'm like, that is a normal person. Like, normal people are not who you see on Twitter. Okay. And
Mhm.
there are plenty of crazies out there, like the people who get recorded in Minneapolis destroying stuff. That's like the real world version of Twitter, but there aren't a lot of those people. Most people around are normal, sane. They just want like a strong economy. They want things to go well for their kids. They want good schools, all that other sane human stuff. And I think that the Trump fans would really do well to, yes, like you said, go talk to some moderates.
Mhm.
Um, so you think DeSantis could win in
Yes.
2024? What positive changes do you think DeSantis would probably make
Oh
first?
my gosh.
So many,
First,
right?
like, there's so many things he'll be doing, and you just look at so first off, he'll get control of DOJ, fire the people that are necessary to fire, and have a much more aggressive handle on that. That's just evidenced by what he's done with his own government and what he's done to
Right.
like local governments. Like, he found a way to fire the Tampa Soros DA,
That's right.
Andrew
Yeah.
Warren, uh, and I think I have a longer term thesis about what happened to Trump during his term. Was the presidency isn't like being the CEO of a normal company,
Right.
because the CEO of a normal company just has authority over the company, like, period, end stop. He says something happens, it happens. He wants someone fired, they get fired. Like, it just happens that way. The president is in this weird, like, he has a lot of power, but it's circumscribed by law in ways that are tricky and complicated, and then also sometimes ambiguous, that can be pushed and pulled. Like, it's a very, what your power is and how you can execute is determined by the law, and it's a very complicated question in a lot of instances. So we need a lawyer to be president, and it's weird to say that because most people think we need a businessman, but I'm like, no, 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 no. We need a good lawyer. You know why
Interesting.
Obama was so effective? Because he was a good lawyer,
He was.
right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not that's and I be effective. I don't mean net beneficial, or like he was a
Right.
bad president on net, but he was very effective at achieving progressive goals and pushing the administration in a progressive direction, because he was a lawyer, and he was a constitutional lawyer specifically.
Yeah.
So I look at, Trump got, he pressed a few buttons early on with stuff like the travel ban for Muslims, and or the not Muslim ban, but
Those
whatever.
those countries, right?
Yeah, the country travel ban, had some bad things happen, just wasn't able to get what he wanted done. And then after that, it's like, well, he's the pilot. He's like a novice pilot in a 747 cockpit, just afraid to push buttons.
Right. Yeah.
Which is such a different take on, we have like the left wing take, which is he's this crazy fascist, and the Trump MAGA take, which is he's this brilliant administrator
40
and
chess, baby.
right 40 chess, blah blah blah. And then there's like my take, which I think is the correct take, which is like he was just kind of stumbling around in the dark for
Hmm.
much of his term, except on foreign policy, which is where he was actually in charge.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
He did great
Like,
there. I think I think you're right about that. And I think that's honestly the most compassionate take for him, because I saw going in, I was like, I hope he knows that the federal government isn't like a business. Because
Yeah.
I know he, he got famous for, or he was most recently famous for firing people, but when he got into office, he didn't. And not only did
Yeah.
he not, the issue with that was that not only did he not fire the people he needed to fire who were already installed, he installed some terrible people, and he then lost all will to keep them in line, which
because he was dependent on their advice because he didn't
right,
know himself what he could do, right?
right,
And so, and or how anything worked. And I think this is where, and this is one thing about Trump, and it's different from DeSantis. I don't think Trump is a very intellectually curious person. I don't think
right,
that's by his nature, right? He's very talented, he's very smart,
right,
and he's a brilliant marketer, but he's not intellectually curious in the sense of like he needs to get a handle on his power. Okay, well he'll have somebody draft up a 50-page paper that explains it, and he'll read it all, and he'll get a handle on it. Like,
right,
that's not Trump. He's like, I want to handle the big picture stuff. That stuff can be handled by advisors. I'll just take their advice, right? And it's like then you're dependent on who you selected as advisors, and you didn't select great advisors. So now we're in the same problem, which is, going back to the comment about Trump being like an 80th percentile outcome. That's what I mean in the sense of, I think it's a much better outcome than the Democrats being in charge, but we'll get more of this sort of muddle, like, autopilot stuff. I think if Trump is president again.
right. Do you think he will have learned his lesson at all as far as like hiring better advisors if by some miracle he does get back into office in 2024?
Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I mean, part of the problem is he won't be facing another election, right? It'll be a second term.
Care. Yeah.
He won't care. There won't be the same sort of public pressure. I mean, this latest fight with DeSantis shows I just don't think he just doesn't care about policy. Because think about it this way: he should be nominally on the side of DeSantis against Disney, right? Disney's the woke corporation that's fighting against a member of the Republican Party trying to stop that. But Trump's rooting on Disney. Like, that's clear from his Truth Social posts. He may post a policy brief that says the opposite, but Truth Social is where Trump's id comes out, and Trump is hoping that Disney wins the battle against DeSantis because he hates DeSantis.
Yeah,
but that's a problem because it indicates just this is still the same guy who's like pretty self-absorbed and thinks of his own interests first before thinking of broader policy interests. So okay, he might care about a policy that we want until Kim Kardashian knocks on the door and says, "Hi, Mr. President, I think you should do this other thing, which is totally liberal and nothing your voters would like. But who cares about them? I'm Kim Kardashian." And it's like, damn, okay. We'll just get another First Step Act. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's the celebrity presidency. And I think that goes right hand in hand with him expecting like the 30,000 foot view surface level approach to everything and being able to hand it off to his advisors and make it work that way. I would call that almost the internet approach, where you feel like you can go out and get like, the 30-second view of everything, and then that'll make everything work. Doesn't work that way, especially with something as big and clunky and fixed as the federal government. Did you see what Nikki Haley had to say about Disney? What do you think of her chances after that?
Oh, I mean, her chances are done, and she needs to not just lose, but be humiliated.
Yes,
I
agreed.
mean, this is, it's embarrassing to the party. It's embarrassing to anybody who's thinking of supporting her. She's doing the same thing Trump was doing, right? She's taking the side of a woke corporation against a fellow Republican. I have no time for anybody who does that. These people are the adversary, and if you don't treat them as such, then you have no position, no reason to be anywhere near power in the Republican Party. Like, it's time for Nikki Haley to withdraw from the race and from public life and go be a mom. Like, sorry, like your career in politics is done. You have, and I think hopefully here's another point. I think Trump would put Nikki Haley in his administration. He did it before.
Yeah,
stop him from doing it again.
Definitely.
I know DeSantis won't touch her. Right, DeSantis will be like, no, you have no role. Go home. Like, no thanks. Do you want to be you can be the ambassador to Mongolia if you want. Here you go. I hear Ulaanbaatar is lovely in January.
Right. Well, even if this hadn't been an attack on him personally, an attack lifted directly out of Trump's playbook, I still think DeSantis would have the common sense to be like, that's just a horrible idea. What the hell are you even talking about?
Right. Like, DeSantis has a coherent ideology. He's able to take new information and then fit it into like, okay, this is how into his broader approach. So like, even if it's not necessarily in his obvious personal interest. So example, Trump gets prosecuted by Alvin Bragg okay, maybe it's in his direct personal interest to be like, let him get prosecuted. But DeSantis had the good sense to, he waited until the information was like crystal clear. He didn't go on rumor. But the moment that Alvin Bragg put out the indictment, he's like, okay, guess what? We are not cooperating with extradition.
Right.
It's BS that you're using your power this way. We're not going to cooperate with extradition. That's just one example of how, of the general approach, which is not like, he's looking out for his political interests, but he's never forgetting that he has how he views the world, and that he needs to his ultimate role is to defend the interests of his voters. And that's what he's there to do.
Right. Well, I don't know if you've seen this latest smear for Ron DeSantis, but somebody was saying that he doesn't go out drinking with the boys after these meetings.
Oh, no.
He spends time with his family. He'd rather FaceTime his wife. And I'm like, sounds great. That sounds amazing.
Right. Gosh, like, what is this? It's like the critique of, oh, he's so establishment. And then it's like, but he doesn't backslap enough with sitting legislators.
Yeah, no.
Like, wait, what? or the other one, it's like he's in the pocket of his donors who actually hate him because he doesn't take their calls. Like, what are, pick one, guys.
What?
Like,
yeah.
what is your line?
Which is it?
Like, like the Team Trump cannot decide what the right way to attack him is. Whether he's beholden to Jeb Bush or an asshole for not taking his calls. Like,
right.
Okay. I think the reality is, he's an introverted guy. That much I can kind of tell. He's an introverted guy. He's a family guy. Very, I'm an introvert too. Very praiseworthy in terms of like, his beautiful family, and clearly, everything's stable at home. But at the same time, like, okay, so he's not backslapping other fellow Republican politicians. I thought this was like, we want the outsider who's going to bring change to Washington, not like the insider who's going to slap a bunch of backs.
Right.
I don't know. Isn't that what we want nominally?
Right. Yeah, it is certainly what I want. Yeah, that's like that's my ideal. If I were to put someone in office that I had like handpicked, it would be somebody who refuses to go along with a crowd, who doesn't slap the backs. My husband's an introvert too. He's going to be a fantastic family man. He would not be out drinking with the guys, partly because he doesn't drink at all, but also because his family is going to be more important, right?
Yeah.
And I am not convinced that we should put someone in power who is not first and foremost good at leading his own family.
Right.
I know it's a little bit considered super, conservative or whatever, but I think it's true. Very small.
I think we
scale.
should prioritize it, right? Like, I think in the sense of that, it's not like a deal breaker in the sense of like, oh no, we need to go vote for Joe Biden, right? No,
right.
No,
yeah.
Right. No. We vote Republican here. But at the same time, you have the choice between two candidates, and all things being equal, one's a better family man than the other. I'd lean towards the better family man. I think that's praiseworthy.
Right.
But that said, if the family man has bad politics and bad policies, and the sort of raconteur or whatever has good politics, then good policies, I would go for that guy.
Right. Yeah, that was kind of what happened in 2016. Well, Hillary Clinton has a relatively stable family, right? But there's no way in hell that anybody's going to vote for her because she's so controversial in the first place.
And
but also,
it's so similar in a lot of ways, I think. If people underestimate, I mean, this is like, if we run Trump again, it's sort of like the Democrats being like trying to shove Hillary Clinton down our throats in 2016. No, people hated Hillary Clinton. They were tired of her. She had been around forever. And people had enough of the Clintons. And they made that clear by electing Donald Trump to be president of the United States.
Right.
If we try as a party to shove Donald Trump down the throats of the American public again, I don't think we will be successful. As I said before, Trump sitting in the White House in 2025 is not a bad outcome. It's a good outcome.
Right.
I just don't even think it's feasible. I think not a chance.
Right. And people take that so personally, but I'm like, look, at the end of the day, my vote doesn't really even matter because I will probably ostensibly vote Republican, whatever happens.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, for my sins, I'll have to because I can't agree with anything the Democrats stand for these days. But my vote doesn't matter. It only matters if the person who is in the position to take those votes will appeal to women and independents and moderates and who hasn't estranged so many of their own followers at this point. Because people, I follow a bunch of people who used to be huge fans of his who now are like, yeah, this this is kind of scummy behavior toward DeSantis. It's really not principled. I don't like it. And now these people are looking back at what he did, like in 2018, take the guns first, due process second, and they're like, yeah, I don't want more of that. That's not cool. I'm not ready to go for that again. And I will always be eternally grateful for Roe being overturned because of judges that Trump put in office, but that Trump helped get nominated or whatever. But that's I don't know. I feel like
I don't think he's
overall,
been smart. I think one of the things he decided to do is really spit in the face of the pro-life movement with his statements
right,
that, like we're not going to support any federal restrictions on abortion. And he's saying
wild,
that not in the general when you might be trying to get votes or whatever, but in the primary.
right,
And people really underestimate. I mean, there's not a lot of strong activist movements on the right in the same way that there are on the left. You think about Black Lives Matter and stuff, but the one single most effective activist movement on the right is the pro-life movement. That's
right,
the movement that can get bodies to show up where they want to show up in front of, on the mall, in
right.
front of Planned Parenthoods. Like they get bodies when they
Actual
make a call.
protest.
They
Yeah,
can organize.
yeah,
And those are the kind of, you don't want that movement opposed to you in a primary election. I think Trump's made a major miscalculation. I think he just sort of thinks, the way to get back people who are the moderates who are upset about January 6th, the way to get them back is to moderate on like trans issues and abortion. And I think that's wrong. I don't think it'll work. I also think it's appalling in a sense. Like these are actually pretty central issues to the right and
right.
central issues to our coalition. And the idea that you just go moderate on them before in the middle of the primary is ridiculous. But I guess maybe he thinks he's got to go left of DeSantis because he can't go right of him. So
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, and I think that's why he's attacking DeSantis from the left. I think that's why he's doing things like, bumping up against Newsom and siding with Disney, and Donald Trump Jr. even coming out and saying, "Hey, maybe we shouldn't be boycotting Anheuser-Busch because they give us a lot of money." Like, props for honesty.
mhm.
Seriously, I appreciate that, but at the end of the day, people who are huge fans of Trump, I've been seeing saying things like, "No way, we're not going to stop boycotting Anheuser-Busch. This is very important to us." Like
Yeah,
very important.
yeah. I'm not gonna buy Bud Light. Why would I buy Bud Light?
First of
There's a
all, that's
million other.
right. Yeah, right.
It's not good. If I want
Yeah,
a replacement, Miller Lite and Coors Light are both better anyway,
right.
right? Like, and Bud Light's gonna, they still haven't apologized,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like they've like put the person responsible for that thing on leave, but they haven't apologized. They haven't said they won't do it again. They
Yeah.
haven't said
Still
we're going to stay out of
vacation.
the trans debate entirely. Like we're not going to promote trans influencers, and we're not going to stay out of it entirely. Like, no, you did something. Like, no, we're not lifting our
Yeah,
boycott.
we're
Remember
not
who your
good on this
customers
one.
are.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly. Well, and that's a little bit to me that's reminiscent of watching the NFL kind of isolating, keeping themselves away from conservatives. I'm like, who do you think watches your shows? Seriously, who do you think
yeah,
watches your shows? Games. Sorry,
yeah,
I'm not a sports person, so I don't know anything
yeah.
about it. But
No, I mean, it's it just shows that we have a lot of work to do in the culture. We need an effect, yet another reason we need an effective culture warrior at the top of the ticket. Like we can
right,
keep, it's funny how you can take any number of different debates and be like, oh yes, that's also why we should have Ron DeSantis be our nominee in 24.
right, right.
Like this is
Well,
yet another reason. Yeah.
100%. Well, Andrew Breitbart notoriously said, politics is downstream of culture. And Andy and I are coming to the conclusion that everything is culture. Like
Mhm.
literally everything 100%. And I think that Trump might possibly be stuck in 2020 when it would have been
Mhm.
more possible and we would have been more amenable to the idea of negotiating on stuff like trans issues and all that other stuff. I don't know about the pro-life thing, but I feel like he's at least stuck in 2020, if not 2016, when people were much more, they were much more willing to go along with what seemed like a much more reasonable Democratic Party and some of their positions. Like
Yeah.
there was, I mean, are you kidding? There was even a point in time where the Democratic Party was anti-war. And I mean, that's something we could have agreed on hugely, but of course not anymore. And I think Trump might just be stuck a few years back. And DeSantis is 100% in the minute. What do you think the odds are that we nominate DeSantis?
50%.
That's embarrassing.
Yeah.
I'm
I
embarrassed.
think it's about one, it's even money. I mean, that accounts for Trump, the fact that Trump has a substantial polling lead. I
Right.
think he's in the position of Hillary versus Obama, where he's protecting a lead. Everybody already knows who he is. It's very hard for him to grow his support. and I think he's the worst candidate. There's a reason they're trying to, set out this meme that like he's not going to debate.
Right.
They're scared. I don't think they're going to do the same thing. I mean, it's embarrassing. The Trump campaign, Team Trump, they're going to do basement Trump. They're going to do or just rally Trump. Like he's never going to have to actually interact with any of his opponents. He just does rallies, and that's all he does.
Interesting idea. I personally don't see that being a winning strategy, because the people who are moderates at this point in time, I honestly don't think anyone in the country doesn't know who he is, first of all, and remains unconvinced. People are pretty damn convinced at this point in time. I don't think anything's going to change their minds. But I do think
the polls don't show people want Trump back as president. They don't.
Yeah, 60%. 60% of Republicans, I think the numbers are, say they just don't want Trump to run again.
I think it's something like 60% want him to run, but of Republicans, that's not actually that much. And
right.
then like independents, it's like 20% or something
right.
silly, where that's the thing that's sort of determinative, right? Independents don't like Biden. We could beat him, but they don't like Trump more. And
right.
so, we can just ignore that, or we can, just chart, Leroy Jenkins.
Right. I feel like that's what we're going to do. And it's
right.
scary.
It's like, guns up, Leroy.
Oh my gosh. No, I don't like that. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what I think about Trump. Yeah. It doesn't even matter if I vote for him. It only matters if he can win. That's all I care about. That's all I care about.
Well, it controls the resolution of everything else. Like, you care about these trans issues, you care about woke corporations, you care about all that. Like, we need to win, guys.
Yeah.
like we need to win. And,
right.
for real, not the kind of winning where you complain about how the ballots were fraudulently counted for 4
right.
years. Like the kind of winning where you take office and wield power.
Yes. Correct.
I like those victories.
Me too. For sure.
No
all right,
moral victories.
Yeah. We are going to wrap. And let me ask you before we go, what have you been reading lately, and what do you want to recommend to people to read?
Oh, yes. I read a very good book called Blood in the Water. And it was very interesting. Dead in the Water by Matthew Campbell and Kit Shillel. I'll send you a link.
Awesome.
But it's about basic maritime fraud, which sounds interesting. Basically, it's like a international criminal organization faking a pirate attack to sink a ship and then claim on insurance. And so you learn all about sort of how the maritime insurance market works, which is its own weird, fascinating thing. You learned about why it would make sense to try and blow up your own boat to claim the insurance money.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, it was a very, very cool book. I definitely like that. I've been also reading a lot of the older Daniel Silva novels, the Gabrielle Allon series, which are always really interesting.
Awesome.
I find myself reading a lot of fiction because to me, it's like there's one central question in politics, and everything else is will be resolved by that question. So
yeah. Well, that's the same reason that I could not bring myself to watch House of Cards in 2015, because I was like, there's literally nothing on TV that could possibly compare to what's going on right now. It was so crazy, and I was like, nah, there's nothing else. Nothing else really matters at this point. All right, awesome. Well, what are your main projects right now? What do you want to shout out before we close?
Just honestly, right now, just follow me on Twitter at Will Chamberlain, and always, of course, support the Internet Accountability Project, TheIAP.org.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Good to chat with you once again.
Thanks
Really great conversation. I hope people aren't too turned off by this discussion of DeSantis versus Trump. At the end of the day, we absolutely do not hate Trump supporters. I have a great deal of sympathy for people who look at him and say, there's somebody who won. Bet you he could do it again. He deserves a second shot. Completely understand. But I'm terrified to put him up there and then for everyone to be like, no, you know what? He can't win. Moderates don't like him. Women don't like him. There's no possible way we win. The idea of losing to Joe Biden, not once, but twice, is just... it keeps me up at night. I got to be honest, and hopefully people can appreciate that. But hopefully we were able to give people a little bit of a white pill. We'll see what happens. It's early on yet. Anything can happen. It's politics after all. All right, to my audience, thank you so much for joining us. Until next time. How's it going?